Well, all right, folks, it's a little after 12 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And I'd like to, on behalf of Preservation Massachusetts, welcome you all to our second preservation conversation of 2023. For those of you who are new or don't know much about who we are or what we do, Preservation Massachusetts is a statewide nonprofit organization that helps educate and advocate for the continued preservation and interpretation of our built environment, our historic buildings, our historic resources, our cultural landscapes. And we started this preservation conversation program in 2020 in the midst of the global pandemic as a way to reach out to our statewide audience and share resources with them. And today we're going to be continuing that, tradition. We are joined today by Mr. Jonathan Lane of the Massachusetts Historical Society, who is the coordinator of Revolutions 250. And he's going to give us an overview of Revolutions 250 and provide us with some insight into the plans to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and the founding of the United States. And perhaps he'll give us a little insight onto why this history remains so relevant today and why it's important that we continue talking about it and commemorating these events. So we'll start off with a presentation from Mr. Lane, and following that presentation, we'll have an opportunity to do some questions and answers. I've got some questions that I prepared that I'm curious to pick Mr. Lane's brain about. But as always, if you yourselves have questions or comments that you'd like to add and be included in the conversation, I would invite you to put your questions in the chat, and we will be happy to go through those as well. So without further ado, you've heard from me enough at this time, so I would turn it over to Jonathan. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it very much. And good afternoon, just barely, to so many friends, colleagues, and partners of Revolution 250. I appreciate your joining us today for this conversation. And I'm sure for some of you, some of the things I say today will be perhaps repetitive or redundant, and for that, I apologize. I try to be as original as I can whenever I speak, but there is a trajectory that we're talking about here over the next few years. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Revolution 250, Revolution 250 is a consortium of more than 65 organizations across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts working together on the commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And it was started back, well, really started back in 2013, but the first major program was in 2015 when they worked together to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Stamp Act protests in Boston, which centered around, of course, Liberty Tree, which became an enduring symbol of the revolutionary movement in Massachusetts and really across the 13 colonies. Having completed that, the largely academic leaders of that group decided they needed to bring somebody on board who could make it their full-time, or in at least give their full attention to coordinating the events around the 250th, and in particular to help push and promote the idea that, as John Adams so wisely said, that the real revolution took place in the hearts and minds of the people long before a drop of blood was spilled at Lexington and Concord. And that's not to say, obviously, that we're not going to tell the story of Lexington and Concord. That's foolishness. These events are at the heart of Massachusetts' revolutionary narrative for a reason. And certainly all of those events, the what we call the signature events of the coming 250th, from the Boston Tea Party, which will be this year in December, to the formation of the Provincial Congress in 2024. And then, of course, 2025 is Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Paul Revere's Ride, and 2026 will be most importantly for the people of Massachusetts, Evacuation Day on March 17th, and of course, the 4th of July, Independence Day. There is a National Semi-Quincentennial Commission, America 250, for those of you who are involved in any of these anniversary meetings with organizations like Revolution 250. You are probably aware that America 250 has gone through some changes and had a few fits and starts, and they are in the process now of completely restaffing their organization. They have a new president, Rosie Rios, who has been involved with America 250 since its outset, but is now at the helm. She's the former treasurer of the United States under President Obama, and she has deep ties to Massachusetts, although she's from Texas. And so we look forward to partnering with her and her staff in productive ways over the next few years. America 250 did come and were represented at the December 16th, 2022 press conference announcing the year of programs surrounding the Boston Tea Party. They spoke very eloquently and, are very interested in supporting the efforts of the people of Massachusetts. To the depth they can do so remains to be seen, to be frank. So just to give you a few details about what's coming up on our docket as we move forward. So we have several ongoing projects and programs. But first and foremost, you should know that Revolution 250 is a recently certified 501c3 under the IRS and have filed as a charitable organization under the Attorney General's Office of Massachusetts. This is in large part to better enable us to fundraise the necessary money for activities of ourselves and our partners as we push forward. There is a lot going on. The 250th of the Boston Tea Party is really taking center stage in our programs at the moment. There are two organizations that are really leading the 250th of the Boston Tea Party, and then there are some ancillary programs in outlying communities, which I'll talk about. From the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum, which is a for-profit museum on Fort Point Channel. They are looking at three major programs. One, of course, is the reenactment, which will occur on December 16th, 2023. They do that in partnership with Revolutionary Spaces, who is the other organization that is at the lead for the 250th of the Boston Tea Party. The reenactment will be probably an all-day affair, potentially all-weekend affair, but certainly all day. So fortunately, December 16th, 2023 happens to be a Saturday. So they are planning on activating spaces around Faneuil Hall, where some of the town meetings took place in 1773. They're going to activate much of the downtown area along Washington Street, essentially extending from the old State House down to Downtown Crossing. There'll be several events involving meetings of the body of the people, it would seem at this point, both in Faneuil Hall and in the Old South Meeting House of a different nature. The meeting of the body of the people in Faneuil Hall will largely be a reenactor-driven program similar to what has been done in years past. The program in the Old South Meeting House, hosted by Revolutionary Spaces, is going to be a world premiere drama that tells the story of the meeting of the body of the people through the use of about half a dozen characters. The script is still in approval process, but they expect to mount that show actually at the beginning of the summer and run it through for much of the summer to give people a greater opportunity to see the production, since seating is somewhat limited inside the Old South Meeting House. The reports from 1773, of course, say they fit 5,000 people in there. They fit about 1/10 of that in there now. And then that will be their production for the evening of December 16th, and then there'll be the traditional parade down to the waterfront. In addition to that program, the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum has been traveling around New England, marking the graves of known participants of the Boston Tea Party. This is going to continue this year. They hope to have it all marked and wrapped up by the end of June of this year. There have been some amazing and fascinating experiences in communities across New England engaging with this history. I think in Massachusetts, they have 3 or 4 different places left to mark. I think most of them are out in Central Mass. They have one in Rhode Island and Warren, Rhode Island that they need to do. And then they just need to mark the few remaining graves in New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, and one in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, France, which will probably be done in late September or early October. That is in conjunction with a program that they're going to be doing in London on September 27th, 2023, in conjunction with the United States ambassador and the East India Tea Company and several other people of note in London, in a weird confluence of history. Where the Tea Party ships lie now, the site of Griffin's Wharf, is an intercontinental hotel. And in London, where the tea was loaded to be sent to America, there is also an intercontinental hotel. So the Intercontinental Hotel is really helping to lead the program, particularly in London, for that particular project. There is some discussion about doing a program in Kilkenny, Ireland, which is the home to one of the other Tea Party participants. They actually have a marker in Kilkenny for I believe his name is Thomas White. But that is still very much in the planning stages, and there's not much to report in that regard. There is also, beginning next month, there will be a new descendancy program that people who are descendants of these participants can fill out their genealogical table and submit it to the New England Historic Genealogical Society, who will just affirm that all of the information is correct. And those people would be admitted as descendants of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. The entire scope of that program, I think they're working with about 250 names of people who are known to have lived and participated in some form or other. Not all of them were throwing tea into the harbor, but they were all tied in with the Boston Tea Party story. Revolutionary Spaces has already had a couple of programs this year. They did a great program, which if you didn't get to participate this year, I heartily encourage you to participate next year, presuming that they hold it. But the Follow the Cod was a project and a program to recognize the date when the wooden codfish was carried from the old State House to the new State House. It's very popular among the legislators. So if you want to rub elbows with the elected, this is a great opportunity to do it. It was a great day for everybody. That was preceded actually by an online symposium and seminar on the history of the Boston Tea Party over time, and viewing at how the Tea Party has been used essentially from its occurrence through modern day as an emblem of American protest and as a symbol for the people taking their rights into their own hands. And it was a great discussion. And the video is online through the Revolutionary Spaces website if you'd like to go and review the discussion. and they are continuing that series of programs. There's a new exhibit that has just recently opened in the Old State House, which is going to follow the history of American protest uh, from essentially the Sons of Liberty on up through. Excuse me, that's the next exhibit. The exhibit that's recently opened is on petitions, which is the history of petitioning in Massachusetts as a form of trying to have your grievances addressed. Obviously, this is a central theme in the American Revolution in Massachusetts, since they wrote numerous petitions that went unheard by the king. But in fact, that right of petition is still part of our political tradition and heritage today. And it particularly in this exhibit is really looked at how people who are marginalized or on the margins of society use petition to try and advance their own freedom. So obviously, we're heavily influenced by petitions by the indigenous people of Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, the Stockbridge, Muncie folks, the Mohican, and others, and obviously people of color, both freed and enslaved in the Revolutionary period, make presentations or petitions for their freedom and for the freedom of others. So it's a great exhibit, great opportunity to begin to examine some of these areas that we talk about during the Boston Tea Party, and really get to the heart of the narrative of the American Revolution, and really why it's important that we continue to study it to this day. Similarly, there will be other opportunities across the Commonwealth to talk about the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum, in conjunction with the Heritage Trolley Tour Company, have wrapped one of the trolleys to look like the brig Eleanor, and they're going to send her to various festivals and parades around the state, not just to represent the fact that this is the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, but also use it as a mode to collect old loose leaf tea that people are looking to donate, and can be used for the reenactment on December 16th in 2023. There's a certain irony, by the way. I was informed that the East India Company of London has just shipped about 200 pounds of loose leaf tea to be used in the reenactment. So there is an irony that the same company that lost 96,000 pounds of tea in 1773 is now sending it to us for our use. Beyond that, for Revolution 250, we have been spending much of our time getting the State Commission established, which is in operation. As a matter of fact, the meeting is right after this one, and to try and get the state more involved, both programmatically and fiscally, in helping to push forward the 250th anniversary. We've been talking with them really about 3 different avenues of participation. Education is key to the purpose of this 250th commemoration. It's commemorations in general being used as a medium for educating the people on not just their history, but on their rights and responsibilities as citizens, and about the sacrifices made in previous generations, and how we have advanced and how we haven't quite advanced far enough. And all of these points are part of work that we're doing with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the Massachusetts Council on Social Studies, and the National Council on Social Studies, which, for those of you who may not know, the National Council on Social Studies will be coming to Boston in 2024. It's about 6,000 to 8,000 K-12 educators who come and attend and get involved in seminars and workshops and programs, and we'll be looking for partners all across the Commonwealth to either come to Boston and present to these educators, or to potentially hold some sort of workshop or symposium for educators to understand the importance of the work that you folks are working on, preservation and education, and in this particular instance, commemoration. So we're looking forward to having them. Their conference is in the fall. Generally, this year it's going to be in Nashville, Tennessee, and you can find out more on their website, ncss.org. The Massachusetts Council on Social Studies has been working with Revolution 250 pretty steadily since 2017. We have been working with them largely on what we have been calling underrepresented voices. So looking at the history of the American Revolution, there are, it's in the way we teach history in America, we often get right to the point. We don't spend a lot of time looking around the margins of the history. And in fact, there are so many voices of the American Revolution that really have only been heard since the bicentennial. It's one of the benefits, one of the great things to come out of the bicentennial was this academic interest in looking at and trying to give voice to people who have been previously marginalized. So it's people of color, freed and enslaved. It's the indigenous people who fought both for the American cause or for the British cause. Looking at prisoners of war, of which in Massachusetts there were thousands at one point in Massachusetts, looking at the history of privateering and the maritime trades, which, again, when you start talking about underrepresented voices, the maritime trades is one of the most significant areas in which we can find the narratives of people of color in this time period, as well as looking at the roles of women, children. Massachusetts had more soldiers in the field than any other colony during the entire history of the American Revolution, except for 2 years, I believe it's 1780 and 81, when they were beat out by Virginia, but just a couple of hundred soldiers. And I say that not just because it's impressive of the service and sacrifice that is spoken of by the men who perform that service, but because of also the impact it had on the communities that were left behind, really the home front communities that we don't really talk a whole lot about, particularly in the 18th century, and the rampant inflation and the need for resources for the army and how that deprives the local communities, and at the same time a greater opportunity for engaging as heads of household for women in particular. So there's a lot of these great stories, and we've been working, as I said, with Mass Council on Social Studies over the last few years to run these summer seminars to help K-12 teachers in particular engage with these stories and these narratives and incorporate them into their classroom learning and classroom lessons. So education is certainly one of the key moments. Commemoration, I don't think, needs a whole lot of introduction. But again, we want the commemoration not just to be something that we want to meet public expectation. I want to make that perfectly clear. But at the same time, there are so many wonderful stories and communities who may want to commemorate stories that involve, that may not make the history books in particular. So whether it's the 1778 invasion and burning of New Bedford, or whether it is, the wreck of the Somerset and 600 surly British sailors being marched on foot around Cape Cod on their way to Boston, or whether it's the closing of the courts in Worcester or Great Barrington, or the prisoner of war camp in Rutland. There's hundreds and hundreds of stories that will be of local community interest, if not of a wider interest to the people of Massachusetts. And so we're looking to help communities engage with their own histories and commemorate those events that speak to them and that they want to push and promote. And then last, of course, is preservation. Preservation, which I will admit that we need to do more with, because as I was saying just before this call, time and nature will come for us all. And I was thinking about the Carpenter's Hall down in Philadelphia, which they've been working on for the better part of 5 years to prepare it for its 2024 anniversary and its role in the First Continental Congress. And then, of course, they suffered a pretty serious fire in December, and now a lot of that work is all to do again. And we need to be mindful of these witness structures that exist around the state, that maybe the First Continental Congress doesn't meet in Edmund Fowle's house in Watertown, but at the same time, its role in telling the history of the provincial Congress here in Massachusetts is powerful. That's the moment when the people of Massachusetts said, we don't need a royal charter to establish self-government. We can just establish self-government. And that is an important lesson, not just for the people of Massachusetts, but for the people around the country as a whole, to understand our role in this history, which we want to promote. And we want to remind people that the revolution really did begin here. And not that we want to denigrate in any way our colleagues in, lovely places like North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Virginia. But we have a duty to future generations to push and promote our history, and preservation of historic structures, landscapes, are important. And one of the areas that we have been most active is in promoting the preservation of the primary source material, which exists in every town hall in Massachusetts. If John Adams has long said that if you want to understand the history of the American Revolution, or the American road to independence, you need to read the minutes of all the town meetings in Massachusetts, and you need to read the committees of correspondence. And that will give you the history of the revolution. And that can't be more true. If you go back, when Newton town meeting passes its resolves in January of 1773, and they resolve that, this is the direct quote, in the cause of liberty, no good man can be inactive or silent. That is never more true than it is today. And that is really the value of not just preserving the documents, which the towns do a respectable job of, but in making them available for study and scholarship. Because again, in pushing this idea of underrepresented voices, because the towns were so involved in the early days of the American Revolution in supplying the soldiers and paying the soldiers and providing them with the material of war, this is where you're going to find the narratives of underrepresented voices. And as an example, I was speaking with the archivist up in Danvers, and he was sharing with us a payroll for a group of men who went out on April 19th, 1775 to support the militia forces against the Redcoats who had marched out of Boston. And they marched down to Arlington, seized a British resupply wagon. And in this payroll, there were 2 free African Americans and 1 man who was over the age of 80. And, these, we tend to think of war as being a young man's game. And we also really do not fully embrace what the Boston National Historic Park is calling in their program the Patriots of Color. And this is where we're going to dig out that information. This is the information that is really going to be the fodder for the next generation of scholars. And so we need to do more with not just preserving it, but also to making it available. I will hold off there because I know you've got questions. So, but I will happily entertain any questions that people have about our plans and programs that we're working on currently.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a great overview of the great work that you guys are doing and a number of your partners, such as Revolutionary Spaces and, of course, the Historical Society. I would encourage everyone on this call, if you haven't had an opportunity, to check out Revolution 250's website or follow them on social media. They're on there every day promoting a new piece of history on this day in history in the 18th century. And of course, as Jonathan just mentioned, their website is just chock full of a number of primary documents and resources that are free and available to the public to peruse at your leisure, which is such an important part about remembering the histories, the back and forth nature of this revolutionary era that makes its commemoration so important. So I'd encourage you to check that out as well. Now, as I said, we're going to have some time here for some questions and some conversation with Mr. Lane here. So I'd encourage you to put your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go forward. Just to start us off, I'll start off with a question I had. And Jonathan, I know before we opened the Zoom, you and I were talking a lot about, our influences and how we got into, history as when we were much younger, and our appreciation of old war movies and things like that. And I wonder if you could, talk a little bit about your personal influences. How did you become interested in the Revolutionary War, and why does this history matter to you?
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, it's partially it's personal. I'm very fortunate in that half of my family anyway have been here since 1620, and during the revolution, I think I now have 32 or so different ancestors who fought between here and New York and participated in the war. Some of them were wounded. My favorite story is of a man named Ebenezer Stetson, who is from Dighton, Massachusetts, and he enlists in the war, does 3 years with the Continental Army. He's at Valley Forge, he's at Monmouth, and he's all over the place. And then after 3 years, he gives up and he comes home to Dighton, where he signs on board a privateer sailing out of what is now New Bedford, Massachusetts. And in the first engagement they come across with a British ship, he gets his leg shut off by a cannonball. And, stories like that. I mean, my family is just one of those families that loves delving into its family history and sharing that with each other. And, we have our foibles, as many families do, and that sometimes the truth is not quite what is represented by your grandparents or great grandparents or even your mother. But for me, the power of history education really came to me when one of my first jobs out of college was at Plymouth Plantation. And I saw the power of using personal narratives to tell a complicated history. And I was fortunate to be attached to their education department, and I traveled all over the United States and even to Brazil to tell the story of the people who settled in Plymouth in 1620. And as I say, it was just a really eye-opening experience. And from there, I've done work in history tourism, and I've worked for a number of archives over the years. The American Antiquarian Society in Worcester was my home for about 8 years, and now the Massachusetts Historical Society. And I have friends all over the nation who are working in various institutions, historical institutions and archives. And I am daily reminded of the power of what we do and how it affects not just the people who interact with it directly, but the people in the communities.
Absolutely. We tend to think as historians, we tend to think, or in the tourism industry, we tend to think of all of these historical events and how they tie into these big, for lack of a better term, historical tourism meccas around the country. So when we think of Civil War, we think of Gettysburg or Washington, D.C. When we think of the Revolutionary War, we think of Boston and the Freedom Trail and Bunker Hill and Pennsylvania. and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But you're right. It is truly, there's so much to be learned from those smaller communities and from those personal stories.
Yeah, and on that point, I just want to point out to people that, one of the things that one of the traits that has risen up in me since I've taken this particular position is that I've become much more uh, of a Massachusetts cheerleader than I ever expected to be. And don't get me wrong, I was born and raised in Massachusetts, love the state, but I've been fortunate. I've traveled in 47 out of the 50 states at this point, and there's a lot to be seen and offered by many of them. But I do think it's important that Massachusetts tell her own story. And I say this advisedly because there are places in this nation. One example is the American Village in Montevallo, Alabama, where they have a replica of the Concord Bridge, and they have what they call a Freedom Trail, which is not the Freedom Trail of Boston. They have a copy of Independence Hall, in which they have a replica of the West Wing, the Oval Office in particular, which is a little strange. They've copied Bruton Parish Church from Williamsburg, and so it's a sort of a historical Disneyland. And I'm all for doing whatever is possible to make people engage in our history. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure I want the people of Alabama trying to tell the story of the first fight at Concord Bridge, because the way they tell it and the way the people of Concord and indeed the rest of Massachusetts would tell it is probably going to be slightly different. So it's important that we continue to push forward.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of education and the American Revolution, we've got a couple questions in the chat here. The first one, I think, will be a good, easy one to answer here. Is you mentioned there is the social studies teacher conference coming up. I think there's one this year, and then in 2024 being held in Boston. What are the dates of those conferences?
Well, let's see. I'll just do a quick look here. I know the one this year in Nashville is, I believe, in October. Let's see. There is no, November. So November 22 to 24 is, oh, no, excuse me. That is the one in 2024. November 22 to 24, 2024 is the National Council on Social Studies at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston. And this year's conference is going to be in Nashville, and it's December 1 through 3.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and I encourage people to, not only attend the conference, because it's a great way to meet people from around the nation, meet organizations from around the nation who are working on this history, but I encourage you to be participants in the conference and share the good work that you and your organizations are doing.
Absolutely. We have another question here related to the educational piece. It's someone who's joined us today as a member of a small town historical society here in Massachusetts, and they were wondering, will there be or is there any funding available for educational programming related to Rev 250?
Yes, well, this is that has been at the heart of our plan ever since we started, and that's one of the reasons that we became a 501c3, because we do want to develop that funding capability for educational programming in communities around the Commonwealth. And in all of our approaches to the state legislature and in our discussions with America 250 on the topic of funding, it has always been a core theme for Revolution 250 and its advisory committee to have essentially, we want to do our best to support in at least some limited way the signature events, but we also want to make sure that we provide support to communities across the Commonwealth who may be looking to do things on a smaller scale.
And does this, we have another question here. Guys, I have to say this is excellent. Please keep these questions coming. This is wonderful. Any interest in bringing the Revolutionary 250 programming to or collaborating with public libraries across the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. Just feel free to send me an email at jlane@masshist.org, masshist.org. And I would love to collaborate and coordinate with anybody who is interested in promoting this coming commemoration. And if I can't get some of our significant authors and scholars involved, I'm always happy to offer my own humble services to come out and engage with your communities. I've had some wonderful experiences. I see Annie Harris was on from Essex National Heritage, and the people up in Essex County have been meeting on a regular basis for a while now and talking about how this commemoration can help their region and to push the history of the Essex region in the coming commemoration. And similarly, down on Cape Cod, I've had conversations with people who are looking at putting together a seminar about the history of Cape Cod and the Revolution. And that is what Revolution 250 is there to help with, is to help get these ideas and programs off the ground in any way we can.
Jonathan, when we talk about the past, whether it's revolutionary history or any historical event in American or world history, and especially their modern and past commemorations, we like to talk about these ideas of a collective memory or a shared history. And in fact, if anybody goes back and looks at some of the foundational texts of the museum and public history world, you'll see that one of the most famous books on the era was written in the 50s by a guy named Freeman Tilden called Interpreting Our Past. His point is that for everybody in the United States, there are shared ideals that we could all benefit from. My question to you, Jonathan, is do you think there is such a thing as a collective shared understanding or shared memory of the American Revolution?
Wow.
You with the big ones. So.
Yeah, so is there a share, by and large, if you look at the state of history education in the United States today, I think you have to come and you have to admit that there is no shared understanding, in large part because there is no real concerted effort to make history education a priority. And when you lose that opportunity to inform and instruct, people's ideas of history are going to be formed by other means. And so if you talk about the Battle of Gettysburg, let's talk about the history of the Boston Massacre or the history of the Boston Tea Party. What are people's understandings of that and its role in the formation of America's society? And this is actually one of the things that Revolutionary Spaces is really trying to help people grapple with, is how the attitudes towards the history of the Boston Tea Party have changed over time and been utilized to examine or explore different aspects of the history. There was that whole period not that long ago when the tea parties were springing up all over the nation in response to one particular political philosophy over another. And I believe there are certain core beliefs that we could come to if we sat down and examined the evidence together in a meaningful way. But and there are, even among the core values, even among the founding values in America today, there's often a misunderstanding, or they don't quite understand the nuance of what was written 250 years ago. And again, I come back to that's why studying these town meeting records or the Committee of Correspondence are so important, because John Adams is going to tell you what John Adams believes. Sam Adams is going to tell you what Sam Adams believes, and James Otis isn't going to agree with either one of them necessarily. So I do think that, America is all about coming, we are in theory supposed to be about coming to a consensus, and in some cases a compromise. But in history, I don't believe that is no longer true. I think there are different approaches to the narrative, this day and age, and that's fine. Disagreement is good. It's healthy. But we just need to be careful how people choose to wield it in the public sphere.
Absolutely. And again, we could come back to, what has been so helpful with the resources that you shared on your website, which are, these are the primary documents. And being able to go back and reading what these men and women said about their perspective. It doesn't give you the whole picture, but it does provide an interesting, unique perspective on that history. And we could use those primary documents along with our, current understandings of history to make a fuller picture. And I think, I don't want to speak for Jonathan here, but I think that's really what it's all about when we talk about commemorating the ideals of the American Revolution today.
No, absolutely. I am often asked, why do we bother? Why, and it is truly wonderful that Massachusetts in particular is such a forward-looking community. Generally speaking, I mean, we do have our backward ways, and our love for the Red Sox is sometimes misunderstood. But in so many ways, we're a forward-looking community, which certainly is not necessarily true in other parts of the nation. God bless them. But even we need to keep our finger on the touchstone of where we came from. That conversation of, so there's two things which I would say in this regard. The using the past to inform the present is certainly crucial today. We talk about the right to petition, as I spoke of earlier. That comes directly from the experience of the colonial governments. There's that famous quote, and I don't remember, I think it appears in a biography of Loami Baldwin or somebody from Woburn, and he's talking about why they fought the revolution, and was it about the Stamp Act or the tea tax? And he says, no, it wasn't about any of those things. He says it was about the fact that we had always governed ourselves, and we meant to continue on governing ourselves, and the British government didn't want us to. And so I think there are certain things that we need to keep our hand on. I just want to, one of the early books I remember reading in this is David Lowenthal's book, The Past is a Foreign Country. And I bring that up because it's something that has always stuck with me, this idea that, we don't often take the time to try to understand the people who lived 250 years ago, who lived through this, and how it shaped them as a society. And we try to give those people modern ideals, modern perspectives, because we see in them something familiar. But we have to go back and really ask ourselves, is it familiar, or is it just our misinterpretation? So, it's important to spend some time studying this foreign country before you try and make any sort of grand sweeping declarations.
We have a question here we have got a couple questions here in the chat. The most recent one I see here is about your calendar of events on your website. Is there a calendar of events where people can see all of your upcoming activities and collaborations? And I think what they're getting at here is, will there be more? Is it a work in progress?
Oh, yes, it's very much a work in progress. And I'm going to see if I can let's see, go to the calendar. Yes, very much a work in progress. We are working with organizations to put up continued material, but I'm going to put in the chat a link that people can use to submit events, which, you know, we would love to help promote. Let's see, where is the, here we go, I think. All right, so copy link. So I'll put this in the chat for people. So if anybody wants to submit an event, would be happy to push and promote.
That's great. And I see too that we've had a couple people chiming in the chat talking about some of their own organizations. And, you know, we've got, you know,
yes,
Essex Heritage and the Dartmouth Historical Society. And yeah, I have to give a plug into all of our preservation partners who may be on this call today and those that we work with. You know, you guys are absolutely the lifeblood of the work we do, you know, and we're always happy to promote your stories and your heritages. And I'm sure Jonathan is the same way in that. So thank you to all of you who are doing the good work of preserving your community's history and sharing those stories.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a quick shout out to Diane Gilbert down in Dartmouth, because I went and toured the Elihu Aiken House just recently, and what a great, I mean, first of all, what a great job of preservation and making the space useful for future generations as a place to both learn and meet and discuss the history of that community. So, you know, and there's great preservation work being done in Concord around the Wright Tavern, which I was really excited with because of its role, not just on April 19th, 1775, when British officers refreshed themselves while their soldiers were out, you know, burning other parts of the town, but also its role in the provincial Congress, which, as I pointed out earlier, is such a crucial moment in Massachusetts self-government history, because that's where a lot of committees met. And actually, you know, Harvard College moved to Concord during the siege of Boston and used the Wright Tavern for, well, they said it was work study or something, but, you know.
It looks like we have one more question here in the chat. You mentioned in your presentation that there were only a few years in the course of the war where Massachusetts wasn't contributing the most soldiers. And one of our participants asked, what were the years that Virginia had the most soldiers? You know?
I'd want to double check the reference, but I believe it's 1780 and 1781. This is at the point where the army really moved south, and but I believe those are the 2 years, 80 and 81, I believe, are the two. And it's Virginia who beat us out, and it's only by a couple hundred soldiers. So I don't feel terribly badly.
Well, I want to be cognizant of everybody's time today, and I promised we'd get out around 1, and I will hold myself to that promise. I want to end on one last question for you, Jonathan. We talked a lot about the ability to have collaborations, especially with all of the over 300 communities we have here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And you talked about a number of ways that they can share their events with you, and certainly we'd be happy to promote them as well. I wonder if you could end with any last thoughts for encouraging people in this chat or people who might watch this video later about how they could get involved in their own communities, preserving this history and educating members of their community about this history.
Yeah, you know, that's really at the heart of what we're talking about, isn't it? And it starts by having conversations like this. You know, the idea of pre-pandemic, Revolution 250 was going around the state holding what we called regional musters, where we would bring together people from historical societies, public libraries, historical commissions, anybody and everybody who is interested in having a conversation about how to prepare for the 250th. And we will get back to that later this year. But it starts with the people in the community having a conversation with others, or engaging with people in the next town over, or people who are doing historical work within the community. Maybe it's a group of reenactors, maybe it's a group of educators who are particularly passionate about this history as well. And then, please feel free to drop me an email. Invite me out to talk to your town. If your town is, slow to get off the starting blocks, as happens from time to time, I'm happy to come out and help whip up the local population and just remind them of the importance of the resources in their own community, and why it's important that we continue to push and promote this history.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today and talking a little bit about your guys' role in commemorating the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War. Thank you to everyone who joined our call today. We could talk about this forever, and hopefully we'll have a chance to follow up with Jonathan later as we continue to talk about this commemoration. If you're interested in seeing more preservation conversations in the future, I encourage you to follow Preservation Massachusetts on social media, or visit our website to see our upcoming events and conversations. Our next conversation will be actually a month from today, on March 14th, where we'll be talking to the Springfield Armory National Historic Site about their Traditional Trades Advancement Internship Program. So I hope you could all join here. And stay tuned on our website and our YouTube channel for a recording of this conversation and all of our past preservation conversations. So with that, thank you once again to Jonathan, and thank you everyone for participating today. Have a lovely afternoon.